Okay, hello everyone. Spider Fanboy here to bring you the part 2 and possibly the finale to What If MCU Spider-Man Was Superior. Last we left off, we just finished off with about the opening act we were getting into the beginning of Act 2 for my own version of the ending for the initial MCU trilogy. So we're not having No Way Home. We are instead dealing with more street-related crime. Uh, Peter just faced off against the Sandman and Electro in the middle of Times Square. Not too dissimilar to Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man's first encounter with Electro in his universe, but he was able to capture and subdue Sandman, making use of a new web configuration, concrete webbing. He sadly wasn't able to completely stop Electro. He couldn't get him using his own foam webbing, and he couldn't even get a spider tracer on him. He was stopped, and his attempt to pursue him was foiled by, unknown to him, Craven, who is going to be watching Peter and all of his allies and his loved ones from now on. Beyond that, seeing the news, plenty of his friends and family were worried, but he was decently confident he now has a potential new ally in the police force in Captain Yuri Watanabe. Beyond that, there are two other very specific vigilantes who have been looking out for this new spider guy, this Peter Parker. That being one Luke Cage from Harlem, and the other being the Devil of Hell's Kitchen himself, Matt Murdock. So we'll go on ahead and just jump into the meat of the story. Um, Probably about the next day or so, Peter does end up getting into contact with Yuri. They end up meeting up at the top of her precinct in Chinatown, and I'm pretty sure that's how it was in the PS4 Insomniac games. I'm pretty sure that's how he gave like a little bit of lore, and in one of his little dialogues when he's like talking to when he's just randomly talking, whether it be when he's swinging or when you collect the backpack collectibles. He mentioned that they met up on the precinct in Chinatown. I'm pretty sure that's also where he meets with her in the beginning of the game. But either way, they meet up there, and Peter ends up giving some of the information and how he heard that about the crime bosses, as well as the fact that Electro and Sandman made mention of the cash that their boss was going to be paying them. So apparently there's a bounty of some sorts on his head. Yuri herself was able to get into some contacts in the criminal underworld that she has herself, as well as what the police force has access to. And she was able to find out that there is a hit on the Spider-Man's head. And it apparently has been put out by the conjoined new alliance between three of New York's greatest crime bosses. The big man of Harlem, who is unfortunately unknown. The kingpin of crime, or at least the former kingpin of crime, Wilson Fisk, who somehow was able to get all of his former charges wiped and dismissed. But they're still suspicious of him, and ever since he came back to New York, they've been keeping an eye on him and his activities, as well as Hammerhead, the current head of the conjoined Magia crime families. Peter himself briefly makes a comment as to how he actually took down one of the crime families, and if that's why you know if that's why Hammerhead is out to get him. And she corrects him, saying that his recent cleanup is probably why they're all out to get him. Not that she's unappreciative, but he ends up bringing very big attention towards him and towards the city. So he needs to be more careful, more cautious, more mindful. Not that he doesn't need to be taking down these crime bosses. She knows for a fact that stopping their operations is what she wants. It's what she wants more than anything. But they have to go about it the right way. Otherwise, there will be consequences. Peter considers this and he nods along. He says if she'll be able to help him in the future, um, you know, with keeping himself mindful. If she'll be able to help watch his back, give him some info, and she says that she can't really do it for free. He almost wonders if she's gonna ask for money, but she says that she'll need information that he can get access to. Anything that he can do to help in their effort in stopping crime in New York. Anything that he can manage, anything that he can scrounge up, any resources, any potential tips or leads he may end up hearing as he's working out there, anything he can get his hands on will be useful. They need to coordinate with one another, and she even asked him if he's going to be dragging in any Avengers into this. He says no, not unless it becomes absolutely necessary. That's basically a nuclear option. And she says good. They don't need any people in suits or giant green men crashing through all of New York again. She appreciated it when it came to the invasion, but when it comes to dealing with street crime, the most she wants to deal with is either him or those other spandex wearing crime fighters. And this actually gets him to question her. What exactly is she talking about? Are there other heroes operating in New York? He'd heard rumors, but nothing ever concrete. She says yeah, she'll see what she can do about setting up a meeting. She'd ran into them occasionally whenever she was working outside of Chinatown. But she also had her own contacts in other precincts, so she could probably help send the word out that Spider-Man wants to meet. But she warns them this may get the unwanted attention of their current subject of interest. So they need to be careful with how they do this. He says that he'll be able to handle anything that they throw at him, but he understands. If she can come up with a location to send out, then he'll be sure to. If she can help coordinate a location, a time, and a place for the meeting, he'll be appreciative of it. He'll do everything he can to keep civilians and public property out of the equation. She appreciates it, and they end up departing. Peter swings back, and he has a little bit of a chat with Karen, probably even Ned and MJ, who may have decided to listen in. And he gets their advice. MJ definitely thinks she can be trusted, although she does tell him to be careful. She's done some digging, and Karen has definitely was able to pull up some of her records and her files. It's clear she has a grudge against the Magia and that she really wants to put them behind bars after what happened with her father. And it's the same backstory from the PS4. You can easily search it up, but basically I'm pretty sure it's that her father was either killed or blackmailed by the Magia. He had a particular talent for, I think, putting them away, and he was either I don't even remember. I just know that her father was involved with the Magia, and she wants to take care of them as a way for atoning and making up for whatever mess her father got involved in. So yeah, she definitely wants to put organized crime behind bars, and she wants to limit it as much as she can. So MJ definitely still tells him to be wary. You never know when she may turn on him, but for now she definitely seems like a solid ally. And Ned thinks it's cool. He now has an in with with the police department. Might get them to stop shooting at him, even if it is a lot rarer these days. There's always the occasional guy. Peter agrees, and he actually briefly senses something. His spider sense briefly flares up, and they ask him what's wrong. He says that he's not entirely sure. He just felt that his spider sense go off. MJ chuckles and asks if that's the name that he decided to make after May was teasing him about his Peter tingle. And he said, "Look," he kind of he tries to brush it off, but it's clear that that old nickname is definitely still bothering him. He says Spider Sense just sounds cooler. Plus the alliteration is good. Either way, he continues with his swing, although he tells Karen to try to take advantage of any nearby security. keep an eye on his normal patrol routes in case someone is trying to track him. He has no idea what may happen, but he wants to be careful. Unfortunately for him, Craven is too intelligent to just let himself be spotted by nearby security cameras, so he keeps to the shadows of the rooftops and alleys, just enough that he can still keep an eye on Peter and his movements throughout the city, but not in any way that he would be caught by traditional or even more advanced means. Peter, it's a few days later when before another incident occurs. We can easily say that this time he actually is confronted by a combination of Scorpion and Bullseye. So Bullseye tries to lure him out into the open just by using, his normal tricks. He tries to confront him in physical combat. It's clear that Peter, while he isn't as skilled, his raw physical capabilities and his numerous gadgets make him way too much of. He's way too good to be able to take down Bullseye. But he doesn't exactly get the chance to pin him. They engage in combat for a few seconds, and Peter's definitely trying to get some. He's trying to get something out of him. He's trying to get him to talk in regards to who exactly sent him, which one of the crime bosses is he being sent by, why are they after him. We can say that he's somewhere near Hell's Kitchen. Uh, and Bullseye himself makes a comment that they're definitely going to have to try to move this fight, and that Gargan better, you know, speed up his entrance. He knows he wants to make it dramatic, but it's about time that they take care of the spider. Peter is kind of puzzled by this. He ends up webbing him up to a wall, and he asks him, "Who's Gargan?" He ends up hearing a menacing chuckle as his spider sense goes off, and he has to dodge a glob of acid that landed just in front of Bullseye's pinned form. And he ends up and he hears a voice ask him if whether or not he remembered him. Peter turns to look towards him, but with the armor, he can't exactly recognize him. So, he gives a few quips. He's like, "I'm pretty sure I've never seen you before. You definitely look like someone I'd remember. What with the, Mountain Dew coloring that you've got going on?" He gives out a few quips, and he's trying to dodge out of the way of his attacks. But when he actually starts physically attacking instead of just relying on his poison, it's clear that he's a near match for Peter. His cybernetic armor, which he can tell from scanning it with his mask, is definitely going to be dangerous. So he ends up briefly backing away. He tries to get away from the tail. It nearly strikes him, but he's able to just barely dodge it, and he ends up webbing it up using some of his foam webbing, which he then layers with some concrete webbing. It's definitely going to keep that, from dripping any of that acid poison. It's going to take a while for it to melt through. But now he's given him a blunt object that he can swing around at ridiculous speeds. So Peter is dodging and weaving, and he actually tells Karen to get into contact with Edith and to mobilize the iron spider suit. He may need it to take down this scorpion guy. And by this point, Bullseye has actually managed to escape, and he tries to, lend some backup. But he is quickly stopped by a billy club coming in and knocking his own out of his hand. He turns towards the offender, and he glares and snarls out, "Daredevil." Peter himself is caught off guard. The devil of Hell's Kitchen? He's real? Wow, he never thought he'd actually see him in person. His suit looks cool. Although, it looks a little different from what he's heard. He didn't know that he wore yellow. He's quickly brought back into his battle with Scorpion, though, who ends up hitting him in the back with his tail, which is now beginning to crack thanks to his usage of it as a blunt object. It's beginning to crack open. Hopefully he'll be able to use his stinger soon, but Daredevil is going to be holding off Bullseye and is actually starting to, hand him his ass on a silver platter. And Peter's actually beginning to do the same. He's following Matt Gargan's, he's following Scorpion's, he can predict his fighting style a little better, and his spider sense is definitely coming in handy. But out of nowhere, Daredevil seems to be briefly distracted, which puts him on an even playing field with Bullseye. He's not exactly sure what it is he's hearing, but it almost sounds like jet propulsion. Something is flying in, and it's flying in fast. He almost thinks it's a missile, but he can't. It doesn't smell like what he would normally feel. What would normally come off from an explosive. Um, Out of nowhere, an object ends up striking Spider-Man. Daredevil actually tries to warn him, although he can also tell that it seems like Spider-Man is allowing it to happen. His body structure is relaxed when it happens, and as the object makes contact with his back, it begins to rapidly envelop his body. He is now in his Iron Spider suit, although it is modified. He's changed the colors of it, not so much out of a disrespect to Tony. He definitely liked the design that he ended up giving him, but he wanted to come up with something just that little more menacing when it came to fighting against all of these hired guns that were being sent after him. So he changed it to a more solid black and red color scheme. The entirety of the spider emblem and all of the blue and gold was instead replaced with a more solid black, and even his lenses would blacken out, similarly to instant kill mode but without the red in the center. His spider arms, his mechanical arms, ended up forming, and they were quick to deal with Scorpion's now free cybernetic tail. This ended up turning the tides of the battle, and with the enhanced functions and greater usage of the gadgets and the greater repertoire and ammo, basically, he was able to dismantle Scorpion's suit. With Edith now backing him up, he was able to properly scan the suit and look for weak points. And surprisingly, it was just at the base of the tail, directly where it was connected to the main armor. He was able to cleave through it with one of his spider legs, while the others were used to assist him in webbing and pinning down Scorpion. Eventually, he was able to remove the helmet, and getting a good look at him, he actually recognized him. He was from the arms deal, back when he was dealing with Vulture at the ferry. He ends up webbing him up and stripping him of his armor. He scans it, and it seems to be made from Hammer Technologies. Huh. He thought that they went under. He didn't know that they made a comeback. Either way, it's not like it would matter. Or, nah. We'll make it Roxxon. Maybe we can make it Roxxon instead of Hammer Technology. Either way, it's faulty. Not as good as Stark Tech, and definitely not as good as what he's been working with. So he tries to question Scorpion, but he's clearly too insane and too far gone for him to get anything. Daredevil, however, was able to get a few bits of information from Bullseye before he ended up making his escape. He's skilled like that. It's difficult and annoying to get him to, be arrested and actually stay still, but he's much too skilled, too well trained. He's been improving his skills. So while he was briefly taken down by Daredevil, he was able to make a quick escape when Daredevil briefly turned his attention back towards Spider-Man and his battle. They spoke for a bit, Peter trying not to fumble over his words, but Daredevil kind of told him to relax, kid. He knows who he is, and he's been following his work. He's definitely improved since his younger days. He remembered hearing about the incident with the fairy, which gets Peter to look down in shame. But he corrects, it's not like he didn't make any mistakes when he was starting out. He definitely did a lot of things that he regrets. And of course, with Peter's powers, any mistakes that he would make would be much more disastrous. But it seems like he's come a long way since then. He tells him to watch out. Being on Kingpin's radar isn't exactly the best thing. He needs to be careful. And if everything he's heard is correct, he not only has to watch out for the Kingpin, but he's also going to have to watch out for Hammerhead and even the Big Man. Peter actually questions him if he knows any. He knows that he works mainly out of Hell's Kitchen, but he asks him if he knows anything in regards to the Big Man, who he is. He tells him he knows a few things, but nothing too concrete or in-depth. He'll get him into contact with someone who does, though. Just to be sure, though, it'd be best that he actually meets him in Harlem sometime tomorrow evening. He'll speak to him then, and he'll be able to introduce him to his friend. Peter actually tells him that he was actually hoping to reach out to him and some other street level fighters. He wanted to kind of bring everyone into the fold, see if anyone else had anything to offer. And he tells him that's not exactly a good idea. Him and this friend of his he's mentioned are the only ones who are really around as of right now. Everyone else is either dealing with more personal issues ever since the snap and the blip, and if not that, then they're following up other leads outside of New York, dealing with their own things. It'd be best not to try to converge. It may seem like it'd be for the best, but it may also attract all of their enemies into working with one another, and enemies working together is how they're in this current situation. Wouldn't want to make it worse by adding any fuel to the fire. Peter concedes and tells him that he'll get into contact with his friend in the Force. And this actually gets Daredevil to question him. He already has a friend in the Force. Kid's more far along than he thought. But either way, he tells him to go on ahead and do that. Wouldn't want to put the word out. Might get the wrong kind of attention. Either way, he'll see him soon. He then leaps off the building and uses his billy clubs to swing away. The way Daredevil do. And Peter does much the same with his webs. He briefly gets into contact with MJ and Ned. And May as well. They all notice the very loud, the very loud action of Edith leaving through his window. He apologizes for the commotion and making them worry, and he tells them to be on guard. There's a guy out there with similarly to Electro, another guy managed to escape. He had this weird bullseye marking on his helmet, and he was a skilled fighter. They'd have to be careful. He'd be able to handle him, but he's not exactly sure if they would. Not to doubt their capabilities, but they're not exactly trained for this, nor do they have any real practice with it. They acknowledge this, and they tell him that they'll be on their guard, not to worry. Unbeknownst to them, however, a certain hunter has been listening in. He managed to place he managed to get a bug. Or, no. We can easily say that he's making use of some kind of enhanced, surveillance technology to listen in from afar. And it's not exactly through, hacking into the line. So it's not exactly any kind of means that, it's using more primitive means. So it's a different kind of technology than anything Stark Industries has encountered. And because of this, it's something that he's been using to hunt down his animals better. It enhances sound waves. It's not exactly easy to use, especially in the city, but he managed to get it down. He was able to pick up specifically on Peter Parker's voice. He had heard him, throwing out all of his quips throughout the battle against Scorpion and Bullseye. So he actually had a very good amount of voice samples to pull from. Either way, it wouldn't be too soon before he decided to finally make his move. But he wanted to see what his friend Alexei was capable of. He pulls up a walkie-talkie and he tells him to be ready to storm the street that he told him to make sure that he's on that truck tomorrow. He's pretty sure that he has the address down right, but he'll do some extra reconnaissance just to make sure. If he's correct, it was a coffee shop that the young lady worked at. Although she had been spending some more time at the Bugle. That might get the spider's attention even more. He'll come to a decision sometime tomorrow. He ends up leaving the rooftop he was observing them from. And unbeknownst to him, another someone was listening in. Matt ends up muttering to himself from a ledge on the same building, just below the roof, that he's definitely going to have to tell Luke about this. He's going to want to be aware of the mess that's going to go down tomorrow. And it'll definitely be a good introduction to the kid. He ends up leaving the scene, and he gets ready to he's also pulling out a communications device so that he can get into contact with Luke. Probably some kind of burner phone. Either way, it's the next day, and MJ is heading into the Bugle. She's been working as an intern there with Betty Brant. They both want to go into journalism, although Betty wants to be more of a news reporter, a live reporter, whereas MJ is looking into more investigative journalism. It's what she hopes to pursue when they go to college. She wants to make use of all of the knowledge and her own intelligence outside of just traditional science. Of course, that's not to say she doesn't have a scientifically inclined mind, but she likes to pay attention more to people than she does to inventions and the like. So she's actually been getting along with Betty. She knows that she briefly dated Ned when they were out on their summer vacation, on their summer trip. So they've actually been developing their relationship, a bit of a banter. Um, Betty has, by this point, completely. She's basically over the point, over the fact that Peter was Spider-Man. Although she does question MJ. They make a fun little game of things that they've noticed and bringing them up, speculating as to what it is he could have been doing. It's more so Betty speculating and MJ outright predicting due to the fact that she followed the things that Spider-Man was doing. She may or may not have had a bit of a hero worship of the guy before she began to hypothesize that Peter was Spider-Man, which developed more into her solid crush on the guy, which Betty does not waste the time nor opportunity to tease her about. Of course, they have to cease all of this gossip between the two, the banter, when Jameson ends up rolling up. He's trying to pin the recent battles on more Spider-Man and him trying to orchestrate it using his resources in Stark Industries, trying to get these people outfitted with technological suits and superpowers so that he can make himself look good. MJ is not at all having it, but she also knows not to make a fool of herself, so she debates against Jameson, and her and Betty instead manage to convince him to report on something either slightly related but not exactly, not as biased, or to something completely unrelated, so that they don't have to hear Jameson you know constantly ragging on Peter again. uh Unfortunately, they're not going to be able to make it too much progress before the place. We can say that they still have, we're going to say that like it's in the same building, but Jameson hasn't bought out the building. Um, it's instead they have like a single floor to themselves. Um, the building begins to shake and it begins to rattle. They're not sure if it's because of some kind of impact or an earthquake, but it all becomes too clear when it gets louder and louder, and MJ tells them that they need to get out of here before they hear a loud crash from below. Rhino has made his appearance. He was dropped off in a truck by Craven, who had been scouting out the area. Spider-Man apparently has actually just gone out to attend his meeting. What he doesn't know is that Spider-Man was actually stopped halfway, and that they're making their return to the Bugle. So he's not going to have too much time. Although it doesn't take him long, he's made use of the camera system of the public security cameras to keep track of Peter's movements. So it's not long before he takes notice of two individuals moving throughout the rooftops, one at a much higher speed than the other, and he also doesn't notice a seemingly average man jogging his way at a very high speed towards the Bugle from the same meetup place in Harlem. Peter he briefly talked with Daredevil before he quickly informed him that he had been keeping an eye on a man who had been watching them in their fight against Scorpion and Bullseye the other night, and that they needed to get to the Bugle quickly. Peter was able to quickly piece it together that it was because MJ was in danger, so he was quick to zip on over, and he already had his Iron Spider suit, his superior. I'm gonna call it his superior Iron suit. He already had his Iron suit on, so He's moving at very high speeds towards to get to MJ as quickly as possible. Rhino is now making his way through the floors. He's kind of like climbing up the stairs, kind of like how Hulk was in Endgame. You know, he hates stairs. And he hears the elevator go off, and he actually suspects that MJ, that his target, was trying to take the elevator to bypass the stairs. So he actually, on the second floor, we can say that the Bugle is like on the fourth or fifth floor. He's on the second floor finally, and he instead charges straight for the elevator and tries to tear it open. He reaches in and he pulls at the cable so that he can get the thing to drop down towards him as quickly as possible. It ends up working, but he notices that it's empty. Unbeknownst to him, they had actually, MJ had the foresight to use the elevator shaft as a bit of a distraction, and they went down the second flight of stairs on the opposite side of the building. So we can say that Rhino was like on the right side. In the middle is where the elevators are, and MJ, Betty, and Jameson, unfortunately, ooh, are making their way down on the left side. They're also moving towards the back entrance of the building. Um, he's quickly called by Craven, Raven. He's quickly contacted by Craven, who informs him of the change of movements of the targets, and he begins bulldozing his way through the building. They finally made it to the first floor, but they're moving towards the back entrance, and they can hear the stomping above them, the cracking in the ceiling above them, as it eventually gives way, and just a few feet away from them, behind them, Rhino crashes through. He looks towards them, and he has a mad smile on his face as he says he's finally found them. The chase of Goose is now over. And he begins to charge forward, only to be stopped by Spider-Man. He jumps in and he webs the wall right by Rhino, and he launches himself through the window to kick Rhino in the face with all the strength that he has and all the momentum he's been building up. He tells them to get out of there as quickly as possible and to be on the lookout for a black-haired man in lion print. The description that Daredevil gave to him. Maybe he wouldn't know that he's in lion print, but he could tell that he was in some kind of animal. He was wearing some kind of animal skin. So he tells him, "Look out for a man in an animal skin," and before he's quickly battered out of the building. Rhino begins to engage Peter in battle outside of the building in the streets of Manhattan, and it is a very destructive battle. Luckily, a certain invulnerable someone is going to be making his appearance to try to minimize the damage as much as possible. Peter himself is trying to do the same. He's using a stronger variant of his webbing formula to try to pin Rhino down. It definitely isn't easy, but he's managing. He's able to briefly at times get him pinned to a lamppost, which ends poorly when when he pulls the lamppost out from the ground and begins to use it like a club, which Peter has to cut down to size with his arms. Rhino himself actually tries to grab the arms, but they quickly retreat back into his suit, and he instead fires a taser webbing directly at the exposed part of his face, which definitely gives a shock to his system. But he ends up lashing out wildly, and he manages to send Peter directly into a car. Definitely hurt, but he's still in the battle. He's trying to minimize all of the damage that he can. He's trying to keep him in just the same general area, but Rhino is not making it easy. He's grabbing cars and he's trying to throw them towards Peter. He's catching them in webs and trying to get the civilians out. He's telling them to evacuate and for someone to call 911 to help with the evacuation and get people out of the way. And he's also trying to move Rhino into a more open area where he can't cause so much destruction. This is when a certain someone in a hoodie and a yellow shirt ends up making his debut. He steps in front of a strike that Rhino tries to send towards a car, so that he tried to kick at a car to send it towards Peter. Peter was unfortunately knocked away and thrown into a wall where he was dazed for a second. He looked up just to see Rhino rearing for a Spartan kick directly into the car filled with a young family, but a man in the hoodie with a yellow shirt ends up stepping in the way and is able to completely tank the hit without budging more than a few inches. He says that definitely is gonna be sore tomorrow, but other than that, nothing too bad. He then sends a punch of his own directly for the same exposed part of the face that Rhino still has. And yeah, his jaw is definitely going to be sore by the end of this day, if not bruised. He's actually briefly sent stumbling back, and Peter takes the opportunity to launch himself directly into the back of Rhino's, to basically the back of Rhino's like head. Um, Not going to do too much damage, but it definitely adds to the stumble as he stumbles forward and actually lodges his horn in the ground for a few seconds. This gives Luke a few seconds to introduce himself to Spidey, to clarify that he's Daredevil's friend, but right now they need to take care of this guy. Peter has a bit of a plan. It's clear that he does still have weak points despite the very powerful armor of his, and he asks him if he can create the opening, if Luke can deliver a powerful enough hit to knock him out for sure this time. And he tells him, yeah, he'll be sure to put his all into the next strike. But if they need to be able to change the plan on the fly. He'll pin him down if he absolutely has to, which means that it'll be left to the spider if things get messy. Which Peter assures him he'll definitely be able to deliver a strong punch of his own if he needs to. So they begin their battle. Peter, with the help of Luke, constantly charging in to keep Rhino off of him and allowing him more mobility. Um, he's going to be able to make much better use of his gadgets and his abilities to properly pin down Rhino. They're able to move him into a more open area where he webs Rhino down using a mixture of his foam, his concrete webbing, and his stronger impact webbing. He also ends up tying a tether. He uses like one of those trip mines from the PS4 game. He like attaches it to, let's say, a nearby billboard, and then attaches, it shoots out the web towards Rhino, and he shoots a taser webbing directly at the billboard to charge it up and overload it so that it'll send an electric stream directly into Rhino and his armor. That's definitely going to be paralyzing him for a bit, and as soon as the electricity begins to fade and he's just left a twitching mess but still conscious, Luke and Peter charge in with a kick and a punch. A punch from Luke and a kick from Peter, and they're able to knock Rhino out. So he's going to be left there, webbed up, and confined to the ground. Um, and we can say that while this has all been happening, unbeknownst to them, Peter is then quickly contacted. Um, Karen alerts him that MJ has made use of her emergency web shooters and that he needs to get to her location as quickly as possible. Luke tells him to go on ahead. He'll handle things here in case anyone else tries to show up, and he'll be able to knock out Rhino if he ends up waking up, so long as he's still held down. Peter agrees, and he also thanks him. He goes to find. He ends up finding. He goes towards the location of MJ, which is in a nearby or in an alley a few blocks away. Unbeknownst to him, this entire time, MJ separated from Jameson and Betty to Betty's protests, but she told him that it's clear that she was one of the main targets, so she needed to get away and to safety as quickly as possible. So she ended up splitting up from them, and she was being tracked by both Kraven and Daredevil. Now, Kraven ended up losing Daredevil sometime during the chaos as he was observing the battle between Rhino and Spider-Man before deciding to go after MJ. He figured she would be the perfect bait for the trap against the spider. But Daredevil ended up getting in his way when he tried to corner MJ. Definitely annoying, but luckily he still has his backup. He sent Bullseye in to face off against Daredevil after they briefly battled against one another for a few minutes. And MJ was definitely making use of her web shooters, but Kraven was much too agile in this very cramped alley. In the cramped alley, he was much too agile, and Daredevil he tried to make a few attempts to briefly, maybe send one of his billy clubs towards Kraven, but Bullseye was keeping his attention all on him. Beyond that, there was another bit of backup that he had that had managed to get away before. In Peter's path, as he's just, let's say, a block or two away, maybe like a single block, he's about to make that turn into the alley when he's struck by a bolt of lightning, which they can all hear, and this actually briefly dazes Matt. This briefly dazes Daredevil, the crack of electricity from out of nowhere, and it completely overwhelms his senses, and he begins to lose ground against Bullseye. Craven ends up la- um, he ends up lashing out against MJ. Um, he did get hit with a few of her taser webs that she had been attempting to make use of, and she even tried to send out a web bomb towards him, knowing that it may get her caught in the crossfire. Although she ducked behind a dumpster. Unbeknownst to him, he had simply sent out some kind of he sent out a bomb of his own, which ended up exploding into a net to an electrified net to contain all of the webbing. Uh, it spared him. It was able to, keep him from being captured, and he ended up popping up from the top part of the top of the dumpster. He was on the lid, and he peeks over. He grabs MJ by her wrists to keep her from making use of the web shooters any longer, and he ends up holding her up with just one hand over both of her wrists, saying that yes, she will definitely make the perfect bait, the proper incentive to get the challenge that he so greatly deserves, that he so rightly deserves. He says that he'll be getting his pay soon enough, but the real payment will be in his great battle against the spider. He ends up leaving through a nearby jet. It was cloaked and it was hovering over the alleyway. It drops down a rope for him to attach himself to, and he is pulled into the jet before flying off. Peter, who has been dealing with Electro as desperately as possible and has been trying not to get his systems fried by him, sees this. He sees the jet leaving, and he tries to shoot a web out towards it, but he is once again stonewalled by Electro. He decides that he's had enough, and he actually shoots him directly in the chest with 2 lines of webbing, which Electro decides to allow. He takes advantage and he begins to attempt to electrocute Peter, but Peter ends up spreading out his legs, and he has them impaled directly into the ground. This causes the electricity to flow through his suit and directly into the ground, nullifying the majority of the damage that the attack would cause. He then leaves the spider suit, similarly to how Iron Man would, and it actually manages to stay. It's still grounding Electro, and he's in his normal suit. He jumps forward, and he cracks Electro directly in the jaw. He was not able to remove the webbing in time, as the armor was actually taking in all of his electricity and all of his energy. It is going to be overloading the majority of the nanites, but there will still be some left behind that will be able to be salvaged. He ends up knocking out Electro, and here he properly seals him up, leaving only enough space for him to breathe. He also he calls in some help from Pepper Potts, tells her that yeah, he's definitely gonna need to cash in on that assistant, but he just has to send in um, some more heavy duty restraints for the Rhino, for the big guy in Harlem, which she actually briefly misinterprets to think she actually briefly thinks that he's talking about the Hulk, because if you remember that 2008 movie that took place in Harlem, so yeah, at least I believe it did. But he clarifies he just needs the guy to be the guy in Harlem in the rhinoceros armor, and this Electro guy. He needs them taken care of. He has some unfinished business. Um, Daredevil, he comes into the battle against Daredevil and Bullseye, which is about to finish itself up, and he simply interrupts and knocks. He zooms forward, grabs Bullseye by his armored head. He's still wearing that helmet, and he cracks his head against the wall. Not enough to knock him out, but enough to briefly daze him. He then allows himself to gather him. He allows him to regather his wits as he begins to web him up, and he interrogates him. He asks him, "Where did Craven take her? Where is she?" Um, Bullseye tries to laugh this off. He knows the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. They all do. He's not like the devil, and not even the devil could get him to talk about this. Oh no, this will be much too enjoyable. Peter doesn't want to play games though. He brutally tears him from the wall. He's still stuck to it. Now that piece of wall is actually he's stuck in between the webbings and the wall, but and he's only being held up by his head. It's the weight of the wall and the webbing, the bricks in the webbing is starting to actually get to him. Since he's only being held up by his head, it's actually starting to drag him down, and it's causing him a lot of pain and discomfort. Peter then launches the both of them up onto the edge of the rooftop, where Matt is quick to follow them. At least he's trying to. He was still dazed by the damage to his senses from earlier, but he makes his way up the fire escape, and he sees Peter on the complete opposite side of the building, holding Bullseye over the ledge by his very head, with his in his black and red suit, his far from home suit. He's a little intimidating, especially since he modified his lenses to match that in his Iron Spider suit. So he has his black lenses. He's holding Bullseye over the edge, and he tells him that he will drop him if he doesn't tell him what he needs to know. Bullseye thinks that he's bluffing, but he ends up letting him go. He follows a story or two, um, probably about 3 stories. We can say that the building is about 4 to 5 stories tall. It's like an apartment building. He drops him down. He falls about 3 stories, and he ends up shooting out a bungee web to pull him back up. He ends up launching all the way back up to the same height as before, and Peter once again grabs him by the head. This once again causes the weight to jostle the entirety of his body, and he can feel almost a crack. He's afraid that his head is just going to pop off his body at this point, and he tells him that fine, fine, fine. He'll tell him what he needs to know, and he ends up giving him Craven's location, the safe house that he took MJ to. This was kind of unnecessary, as it's not long before Craven makes a more public announcement to all of New York that if the Spider-Man does not come to face him in a life or death battle, he will have the girl killed. Um, he wants the challenge of his life. For so long, his hunting has been too mundane. He had hoped to take on one of the costume sorts, but ever since the snap, ever since the devastation that robbed him of so many animals, so many potential trophies, it had taken a lot of their fire away. There had been a wandering Ronin of sorts that he had been interested in for a time, but then they all came back, and the spider made himself known. He will take down the spider, or the spider will take his life in return, if he does not want to save the woman that he loves. If he does want her safe, then he will have to come at him with the intent to kill. He tells him to meet him at sundown, and to not hold anything back. Peter then actually drops Bullseye properly, although luckily the bungee cord is still attached to the bottom part of his body, probably his feet. However, his back, more specifically the bricks on his back, do end up crashing into the side of the building. This causes the bricks to fall loose, but Peter is quick to completely cocoon him in webbing and leave him there for Daredevil to turn into the police. Daredevil questions him if he's really going to go through with this. This could make or break who he is, who Spider-Man is. And he tells him that he's not going to face Kraven as Spider-Man. He's going as Peter. He needs to save her. He will not let her die. He won't let anyone die. Never again. He leaps down towards where the Iron Spider suit was. It's crackling with some electricity, and there is some level of damage. Nothing too crazy, but it's clear it's going to be a bit. He's going to need to properly repair the suit, but he doesn't have time to get to the Stark Labs. He doesn't have time to make his way to the closest Stark location, which is the compound ever since Stark Tower was sold. So he's going to have to make do with whatever nanites are in the best shape. He simply tells the rest to make their way back to he tells Edith to gather the rest of the nanites and to have it picked up by Stark Industries, and to simply go into lockdown. The undamaged portion of the nanites which he does have, he tells him to engage in to integrate itself into his current suit. So we're gonna get that kind of suit that he had in No Way Home, except all the gold is going to be black. And he's also going to have, he specifically designed some of them to form into the big, bulky gauntlet web shooters that he has in Iron Spider. So it's going to make him look a lot more like the Superior Spider-Man. So they're going to be silver on his wrists, those big, bulky, silver gauntlet web shooter things, and the rest of the detailing is going to be all black. He asks if he has enough nanites to form these spider legs, and they do once again form, although they're a little thinner, but it's clear that they'll still be able to work properly. He then tells everyone to, he tells Edith and Karen to, or he tells Karen to send a message out to everyone else to make sure that they're properly protected and to move into any nearby safe houses. He tells May and Ned together to meet up with Happy at Feast so that they can get out of New York as quickly as possible. And outside of that, he orders Edith to send a message out to Yuri Watanabe to not send any police to the location where he's going to be meeting up with Kraven. He doesn't want Kraven to suspect that he's getting outside help and potentially kill the hostage. She calls him out. It's clear that this girl has significance towards him. She's pretty sure that's the girl she's been seeing being posted on social media as his girlfriend, so he needs to be careful. He tells her that she knows that she means well, but she needs to focus on the bigger picture. She needs to work with she needs to get in contact with Daredevil and the Luke Cage guy who helped him out in his fights. They might be able to give her the information that she needs on the Big Man, the Kingpin, and Hammerhead. It's clear that they've been at this longer than he has, and they'll have the experience that they need to the experience and knowledge that she may need to put these guys properly behind bars. And if not, she's definitely going to be able to get a lot of information from Electro, Rhino, and Bullseye. She sighs and accepts that she has to take care of the more organized crime elements while he handles his big flashy fight against the supervillain to save the girl. He briefly chuckles at the quip and the little prodding at the situation, but he tells her that not to worry, he's got this handled. She questions him. Does he? Is he really going to kill this guy? He says that he doesn't know. He just knows he needs to save her. So he ends up leaving, and he cuts all of his communications. Everyone is worried for him. May wanted to properly talk with him, but he didn't even let her get a word in. So he makes his way over to the warehouse to face off against Kraven, and it is not going to be easy. He has been designing traps and making use of weapons and technology to attempt to test and weaken him. But he's just pissed. He's tearing through all of the traps. Maybe he set up the warehouse so that it would be kind of like a training room, except much more deadly. There are compartments of the warehouse that are shifting so that he can never properly web onto it. All he does is tear through the compartments in their entirety. Maybe some robots, some training androids. Maybe even you can make them what are they called? LMDs, life model decoys that Shield normally uses. He has them posed as guards, as human beings. But Peter was able to get a proper scan on them. He recognizes the fact that they're not human. So without any hesitation, or at least with very little hesitation, he completely tears through the human-like obstacles, and he begins to tear them apart. The more he faces against them, the more used to them being fake that he becomes. The less he begins to hesitate, and the more effort he's putting into his strikes, into all of his punches and kicks, and his tearing through them with his mechanical arms. He eventually gets face to face with Kraven. He has MJ tied up, and she's obviously giving Peter a look. He can't exactly read all of the emotions in it, but the biggest ones he can see are concern and determination. It's clear she's been putting up a brave front to try to throw off Kraven, but he doesn't seem to care too much about her, more just what she represents in regards to Peter. So he hasn't really been giving her too much of his attention outside of making sure that she can't escape. He wasn't able to remove her web shooters. He had no idea how to. He didn't know that they were biometrically made so that only she could interact with them, and Peter, of course. But she's been trying to fiddle with them, trying to get them to the proper setting that may assist her in getting out of here. But Peter is concerned, and he actually tries to go for her. He tries to completely bypass Craven. He doesn't really think much of this clearly non-superpowered mortal man. But he proves that he's a decent danger when he lashes out with some kind of spear. He ends up showing it off to Peter, asking if he likes it. It's something he was able to get his hands on from a one Ulysses Claw. Apparently this is what those Wakandans use. Vibranium. Very, very dangerous. Can cleave through most forms of metal. He wonders how it'll hold up against spider flesh. They end up engaging in battle with one another. Peter is oddly silent throughout all of it, only really asking if Craven will surrender or to let MJ go. These are the only moments where he seems to be like his normal self, or at least something vaguely resembling it. But he's getting more and more ferocious against Craven, and Craven is not able to keep up. He's not a superhuman. He's not even enhanced. He's not a super soldier. He can't keep up. Not for long. He's peak human, and he's definitely a decent challenge, but that challenge won't last long. Peter is eventually able to knock the spear from Craven's hands, and he quickly pulls out two daggers. They're not exactly made from vibranium, but they're a decent substitute. Peter doesn't care for that though. He charges forward and Craven does the same, and he actually manages to eventually catch Craven by his wrists, which he promptly breaks, before Spartan kicking Craven directly into the wall. He then begins to web him up, trying to keep him immobile. But Craven says that he meant what he said about this being a battle to the death. He will not take anything less. He ends up giving a vocal command in a language that Peter doesn't recognize, and MJ is then hoisted up. Unbeknownst to either of them, she had actually had a hook attached to the rope tied around her, and she is hoisted up. Peter attempts to jump forward, but before he can launch himself, the ground begins to give out. Opening below them is a vat of acid. He tells her that the girl will drop, and she will be plunged into the acid. Peter, once again, he was able to catch himself using some of his webs, and he even made like a bit of a tightrope. He had planned to jump from it, but once more the walls begin to shift. Apparently, even this room of the warehouse had the same thing, and he hadn't even noticed. He'd been too preoccupied with MJ and Craven. The walls begin to shift, and it makes it difficult for him to properly get a place where he can perch for even a second so that he can launch towards MJ. He's constantly trying to keep himself from falling into the acid, and even has to keep Craven from falling. Craven tells him that he can just let him go. He can fall towards the acid, towards his death, or Peter can kill him himself. The second that his heart stops, that his heart stops beating, all of the mechanisms will shift back into their original positioning. The girl will be dropped down safely on the ground, and she will be safe. This he swears, on his honor. And on his honor, he demands that the Spider-Man kill him like a proper warrior. He demands that he gives him a death in battle. Even if it is one as being dropped, it will prove that he had lived his life trying to become the Predator. And if he is truly to accept his place as below the apex, if he is truly to acknowledge himself as a mortal man, then he will die at the hands of Spider-Man, no matter the terms. Peter questions him on this. Is he absolutely sure this is the way he wants to handle things? Because he will ensure that his heart stops beating if it means he can save her. MJ is she's barely managed to hear them over the whirring of all of the mechanical parts shifting around them. She's barely been able to keep track of their conversation, but she heard the question Peter just asked, and she's trying to get to him. She's trying to tell him not to do it, but her mouth has been muffled. Craven, as I mentioned before, didn't really care for what she had to say. but it's clear that he's not paying enough attention to her, at least not to her words. Peter is definitely keeping an eye on her to make sure that she doesn't fall, but he also has his eye on Craven. When Craven says that yes, even if it is a seemingly pathetic death, it will prove that his way of life is right, that it is might that makes right above all else, that the strongest decide what happens to the weakest. Peter briefly pauses, or at least he goes silent. He doesn't exactly pause all of his maneuvering across the mechanical walls, but he does end up. He says, "Fine, you can have it your way." He ends up charging up his gauntlets. He tells them to unload all of the taser webbing and to push it into their max power settings. Karen wants to protest this, but Edith acknowledges it. But as does Edith. She's been learning. Her AI has been growing, and she briefly ponders if this is exactly what he wants. He tells her to go into instant kill mode, which stops all of their questioning. It doesn't exactly strip them of their free will, but it does stop all of their questioning. All they see is the priority target. All they see is the priority that Peter gives them. The first priority is to ensure that he is, alive, that he is kept safe throughout the battle. The second priority is to eliminate any enemy targets. Craven is acknowledged as an enemy target. Without hesitation, his enhanced web shooters begin to charge up to the maximum voltage that his taser weapons can go, and he tases Craven, and he doesn't let it stop. His heartbeat begins to slow down, as does the movements of the mechanical walls. His laughter begins to die out, and eventually his heart stops. MJ is lowered onto the ground, which is properly closed up. Peter stops what he's doing to Craven and rushes over to her, frees her, and he hugs her. She hugs him back, but she questions him. "What did you do? Why did you do that?" He shuts her up with a kiss and simply tells her that he did what he had to protect her, to keep her safe. Besides, it's not like he was going to follow through. She is once again confused, but he says that they don't have any time. They need to get out of here before he can do what he has to do. She wonders if he's going to be going on another rampage, going after the guys who set this all up. But she also has faith in him. It's clear he has some kind of plan, so she decides to follow through. The two of them end up exiting the warehouse. He wants to make sure that they're far away, that there wasn't any last-minute trap that Craven set, and he even had Edith run a scan. She tells him that there's nothing else. All that was there was the mechanical whirring parts of the secondary part of the warehouse, and the vat of acid that was put underneath the ground. But other than that, no explosives, no final trick. It seems Craven was a man of his word. Peter looks down at the lifeless body of Craven, and he says that he's not, well, as much as he tries to be, he himself isn't. He once again tells them to charge up his gauntlet, to charge up his web shooters, and to set them to a similar voltage used for defibrillators. He then begins to kind of pull a Batman versus Bane in Batman Origins, and he begins to shock him in the chest. He tells them to up the voltage, and he does it again. Tells them to up the voltage, and he does it again. He begins chest palpitations, trying to restart his heart. And eventually, Craven awakens with a gasp. His vitals have started up again. He's briefly lost for a few seconds, but it's clear he's not exactly in the right headspace. He did die for about a minute there, but Peter takes the opportunity to properly web him up, to properly restrain him. Craven ends up asking him why. Why did he do that? He had finally gotten the death he deserved, the death that he wanted, the death that he needed. During this time, during his travel over here, as he was webbing his way through the city towards the warehouse, he had told Edith and Karen to take the recording that Craven had put out in the public and to run a facial recognition scan. And from what they were able to tell, he was not only the brother to the guy that had worked with Mysterio, that they thought was working with Shield, but apparently his family were in unfortunate casualty during the initial snap. Not from the dusting itself, but the fact that they were on an airplane, traveling out towards South Africa to meet up with Craven as he was out on one of his expeditions. His family was coming to visit him, but the pilot and many of the crew were victims of the snap, of the devastation. Their plane crashed, and there were no survivors. Craven was left alone with nothing but his brother, who ended up being arrested by Spider-Man. Craven wanted to face off against this mighty warrior, this hero. He wanted him to suffer, and if not that, then to at least end his own suffering, to grant him this one mercy, and to allow him to be with his loving family, with his wife, with his children. But he didn't get that, and he asks him why. Why didn't he? Peter instead responds, it's like he said, the strong get to decide what happens to the weak. It's his responsibility. As with great power comes with great responsibility, and he made his choice. He decided that he will live, whether it be behind bars, or, if necessary, in a body cast. If he ever tries this again, he'll show him what it means to truly suffer, in a physical manner at least. He's not going to kill him. He's not going to give him what he wants. But he does wish that maybe one day he'll be able to see his family again. But he also warns him, don't ever try to make him the reason that he reunites with them. If he really wants to die, he can do it on his own terms. He's free of him now. He's gonna be the police's responsibility going forward. He leaves with MJ, who was briefly concerned about Peter's apparent, not really his attitude in regards to Craven in his life, but he clarifies. He was just kind of in a bad headspace right back there. He didn't truly mean it. He doesn't wish Craven death. He may wish him suffering for trying to put MJ in danger, but he wouldn't really want to kill him. Well, maybe, but he'd never truly follow through it. It's not what his Uncle Ben would want. It's not what Tony would want. It's not what MJ or May or Ned would want. And it's not what he wants. He just wants to go home. MJ agrees. Thanks him for saving her, for putting so much at risk. There was always the potential that he wouldn't be able to revive Craven. She thanks him for everything, once again calling him her tiger. He grins. He says that nickname is actually starting to grow on him. He really does like it. She says good. She thinks it's going to be sticking around. She likes the way it rolls off her tongue. They eventually go home, and that's basically the end of the proper conflict. As with most Marvel movies, it does end up having to, wrap itself up with some nice positives. So he goes home, and after a few days, all of the super criminals that Peter had been facing off against are properly tried and put away. Stark Industries actually offers their services to help contain some of these more superpowered variants, these superpowered criminals, the likes of Sandman, Electro, and Rhino, and even Mac Gargan. It appears that his powers weren't completely cybernetic in nature. He had to undergo some kind of biological enhancement in order to be able to handle the cybernetics in the first place. It causes him chronic pains, but they'll be able to manage. There has been some talk about a proper supermax prison for superpowered individuals. They're thinking about calling it the Raft. It'll be something that they'll have to consider. The lawyer to, assist in putting these guys away, as well as they were on trial, as well as questioning them and prosecuting them for their connections to the more prominent criminal underworld figures, such as the Hammerhead, head of the Maggia family, the recently outed big man of crime Lonnie Lincoln, and the returned Wilson Fisk, the former kingpin of crime. He took all of these men to court using the evidence that they managed to gather from the testimonies of all of these superpowered criminals, and it seems like they're going to either be going away for a very long time, or if not, they're definitely going to at least have to lie low for a bit. Although it's clear that they're willing to go to great lengths to strike against these superheroes like Spider-Man, and they even curse individuals such as the Daredevil and this Power Man, as he's been called by the media. Although he quickly comes out to clarify for himself. He's opening services. He's simply branding himself with his own name, Luke Cage, the hero for hire. Hmm. Peter is observing all of this from his phone and the TV on social media. He says that Luke's new name for his new business actually sounds pretty cool. He wonders if he'd be able to make any money off of his superheroing gig, but the pictures he's been sending to Jameson as a bit of an apology and a way to help him make money after the destruction of his his business area have been pretty good. He forgot how much he liked photography. MJ comes over, gives him a little kiss on the cheek. They're having a bit of a moment in his apartment. She tells him to get off his butt. She knows that he put a lot of effort into breaking his back saving the city, but now he needs to put effort into breaking his back to move all of these boxes into the truck. They need to head out to MIT soon, or they need to head out to Massachusetts. They are gonna have to set things up at their new apartment, and it's gonna be a long drive um, towards Boston. He says that they could always that well, he's pretty sure Pepper and Happy offered their services, but she reminds him he was the one who wanted to do things on his own, as his own man. So he's gonna have to man up and get to driving and moving those boxes. He questions this. What? He's gonna have to move the boxes and drive? And she says, yeah. She's the one who has to put up with all of his quips and complaints. The camera ends up kind of like panning away as they're moving throughout the apartment. They're properly moving out. They're going to be moving into a place with Ned. Or maybe Ned will be getting a place of his own. They do need some private time. But yeah, no. We can easily say that the three of them have decided to become roommates at MIT. Apparently Flash is going there as well. And I'm gonna leave him for something else. I don't really care for MCU Flash too much. Um, but we end up getting to they're about to properly get into the truck, and they're about to finally begin driving out. It's about mid after it's about like afternoon, 2 or 3 o'clock ish. It's sunny outside, and Peter's getting ready to head in the truck. He has a moment with May, and she even hands him his order from the bodega, the Delmar's place. You know, the sandwich that how he likes it smushed. He says that oh, he's definitely gonna be missing this food. May raises an eyebrow and asks if he's only gonna be missing the food, but he says of course not. They have a nice moment, a nice hug. She tells him that he's sure that Ben would be proud of him, of the man that he's become, of the responsibility that he now bears, and just how well he handles it. He briefly tears up and thanks her before they finally get into the truck. And Peter is driving off towards a new part of his life. He has his girlfriend, his best friend. They're moving out towards college, towards university, and things are looking good. Unbeknownst to him, and a mysterious figure is going to be speaking to some of the more prominent individuals that had faced off against Spider-Man. Kraven seems to be a lost cause. His battle spirit seems to have left him after his confrontation with Spider-Man, and they don't want to waste any time. They briefly meet up with Matt Gargan. He definitely has a vendetta. They'll be able to make good use of him. They also consider the Sandman, the Electro, Rhino. Yes, they'll be good, but surely there are more out there. Adrian Toomes. They look over the file. Maybe. There's something there. They briefly pull up what they have on his daughter. Apparently she's been doing quite well for herself, keeping out of the public eye. They wonder, maybe she's up to something. She may be of use. Either as leverage, or another tool. She may have her own vendetta against Spider-Man. They consider before putting the file down. They then look over. They review their plans, their ideas for the future, and they then look out towards the window. They look out from the landing pad on their high skyscraper. Along the side of the building, Oscorp, where the former Stark Tower, where the former Avengers Tower once was, now Oscorp. Norman Osborn sighs to himself. Yes, he'll be able to make use of these individuals. He leans over to the intercom. Octavius, how goes our little project? He answers. Oh, Mr. Osborn. It's going quite well. I believe the symbiote, yes, the symbiote will be ready soon enough for proper human testing. He looks over at Mac Gargan. Good, good. And the recruitment program for human testing? Yes. Yes, we have our various candidates. You were looking for more physically inclined. I believe we have a few options to pull from. One managed to barely scrape by, though. One Flash Thompson. Apparently he's heading out to MIT in case this falls through. Get in contact with the young lad. I don't think he'll be needing any education anytime soon. He'll find his calling here at Oscorp. He then hangs up, not saying another word. He puts his hands behind his back and claps them, keeps them together. That classic supervillain pose as he looks over. He once again looks towards his computer at his desk, sees the image of Spider-Man. Yes, everything will be coming together. And that'll be the end. That was our post-credit scene. So, yeah, I really hope you like what I came up with here. I know it's a bit of a mess. I'm not the best when it comes to, speaking these things. Maybe writing it. Maybe I'll properly put this down as like a fan fiction or something. But, yeah, this was just kind of, me getting this out there. That's the end for this, for now at least, until we see more of the MCU going into Phase 4. But, yeah, that'll be all. I hope you liked it. If you don't, let me know what criticisms you have, whether it be with the way I present my presentation, my style, my storytelling, the story itself, blah, 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 blah. Anything that you have that'll be constructive, let me know. And, yeah, I'm pretty sure there's a link towards the art. The name is obviously right there in the top corner for the thumbnail. But yeah, the art is from an artist on ArtStation, and the link should be in the description of the video. So, yeah. Like, comment, subscribe. Hit that bell notification if you want to see more. And that'll be it. I'll be posting part 2 to what if Deku had tactile telekinesis soon. So, bye-bye.